What first time? Wonderful. Hello. Yes, so I'm here to talk to you about the project that doesn't have a name. Um, inside SUSE, we've been working on this for about a year. We first called it Core, then we called it Cornerstone, then we called it Elements and Voldemort and whatever. It doesn't have a name. The future is unwritten, and so is the title of this slide deck. And while the name isn't there, the concept is, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. So to talk about that, really, I need to start by talking about where we are as a project in openSUSE. That means I've got to talk about Tumbleweed for a little bit. And then I want to talk about what makes a perfect regular release. What do we do now for that? I'll give a bit of a different perspective on SUSE's take on the topic. I'll talk about the big announcement, and then I'll give you everyone a proposal for the future of the regular release. And then there's time for questions at the end. So, openSUSE, we're 9 years old. Nearly 10. This is the one cat picture. I have to have one in one slide deck somewhere. And we're always changing. We've been doing this now for 9 years, and every year there's always something new coming on. We're always doing our new releases, we're always trying new things. It's why we're here, it's why it's interesting, and it's also why we're rather successful. I won't go into great detail of these, but these are the download statistics for our recent releases, and as you can see, 13.2 is doing an awful lot better than all of our previous releases. But it's not just about the releases. A big part of the project is the tools that we use. We're a project that has a very good Linux distribution, or several very good Linux distributions. But really, if you sort of talk about what is the secret sauce of the openSUSE project, a big part of it is the tools that we've made, the tools that we've used to build what we work on, and all the other things that kind of come off that. So, got to start with talking about OBS. I mean, OBS is also 9 years old. It basically started at the same time as the rest of the project. We use it for building everything openSUSE, everything SUSE. As you know, it supports all these different distributions: Red Hat, Fedora, Ubuntu, Debian, Arch, and it's used by a lot of other people too. OwnCloud use it for building their packages, Linux Foundation, VLC, etc. And as Marcus already talked about, we have OpenQA, which interestingly started 3 years later. And we use it for testing all the distributions we use. We're also now starting to use it for testing applications much, much more. It's a key part of the rolling release process for Tumbleweed. SUSE have now adopted it for testing the SUSE Linux Enterprise releases. And also, Red Hat have adopted it for testing Fedora. They're now using it for testing Fedora Rawhide, Fedora 22, and hopefully they'll carry on using it, carry on sending patches, ideas, all that other fun stuff. So putting it all together, we have Tumbleweed, our rolling release. And this started in 2011, but I'm kind of going to say 2012 because it makes it a nice 3 years after we started with OpenQA. And the rolling release now has really become the driving force of the openSUSE distribution. I mean, we originally had it as sort of an add-on on top of the regular distribution. We then took Factory, started OpenQAing it an awful lot more. It's now become a standalone rolling release in its own right. And we have approximately 11,500 users using it every day and growing. And hopefully growing more because we're going to actually start marketing it now rather than just leaving it as a hidden repository somewhere that nobody knows about. And the pace of change of Tumbleweed is phenomenal. The amount of work that we do every week on Tumbleweed and don't really talk about it is really, really quite impressive. So last week, one of our maintainers said, as he does every week, his regular report to the mailing list said, oh, it's a quiet week, we didn't really do much in Tumbleweed this week. We did 3 distribution releases. That's 3 new versions of the ISO, 3 new sets of packages in the repositories. 146 packages in total got changed. That's not including libraries and shared packages. That's actual bona fide code changes in the distribution with changelog entries. 15 new packages on the DVD. We took away 38, so we're not just adding stuff without tidying up after ourselves, and 1 new kernel. Is that really quiet? It's not quiet at all. That's on our quiet weeks, we're doing what most other distributions would, do in a month. And on a busy week, we're doing crazy amounts of work. So this was the beginning of April, where we had 2 new kernel versions, the new version of GNOME 3.16, which we managed to have published, shipped, released in our tested, stable Tumbleweed distribution before anybody else at all. Even Arch, the distribution that kind of likes to think they invented rolling distributions. So, thank you. So when it comes to getting your openSUSE on a platform in a stable way that works, Tumbleweed really is the best choice for it. And that's not just the best for openSUSE users. I'm standing up on stage and saying it's the best for anyone using Linux. If you want a stable Linux distribution with the latest packages, download Tumbleweed, install it, use it. But that's rolling releases. A regular release is a very different kettle of fish. And when we're talking about the openSUSE regular release, after 9 years now, I've always felt that the regular release for openSUSE has kind of had itself stuck in the middle, being pulled in 2 directions. On one side, we've always had this pull from the community, from a good chunk of our users, for more new stuff. The latest of everything, always new, newest of everything in the openSUSE stack. And on the other side, we have an equally sizable chunk of users who want everything to be more stable, more reliable, not breaking all the time, and in some cases not updating all the time. They just want a platform to actually run their stuff on. And this has been a really, really big part of the openSUSE story for the last 9 years. I mean, I'm thinking back to sort of the worst moments of mailing list flame wars, where we spent 6 months talking about when the release schedule should be, because it's kind of the key topic there. Do we do 8 months? Do we do 12 months? Do we do something longer? It all boils down to these 2 dynamics of, do we go faster or do we go slower? But now we have Tumbleweed. So really, the kind of faster side of things is taken care of. If you want the latest of everything, use Tumbleweed. And so this gets me thinking of, well, what would the perfect openSUSE regular release look like? We have the opportunity here to probably define something that's going to be more stable, maybe moving slower, but more suited for that other side who were always calling for that in the openSUSE regular release since we've started. So obviously, we're talking about a very, very stable distribution. Well maintained. No point having a stable distribution that isn't getting patches, isn't getting security updates. You still need it to work. And you need it to work in production for about 3 years. So a life cycle of about 3 years where there's no major changes, there's no huge changes to the distribution. But we're still a community distribution, and we still want this to be a community distribution. So you still would want a very wide selection of packages. There's no point having a really, really nice stable platform that you can't install anything on because nothing's compiled for it. So in my mind, these are kind of the things that we've heard on the mailing list, and we've heard in conferences like this for years. And we've always said we're impossible. But now I think it's time to think about whether we can actually do it. And from a different perspective, I'm now going to talk from sort of SUSE's side of things, who've been looking at this as well from their business side for, well, also the last 3 years. If anybody's been at an OSC for, well, the last 2 years, you've seen this slide, which is talking about the famous gap, where SUSE have their enterprise product, which of course targets enterprise users and big developers. We of course have our community distribution, which does a very good job for being for developers and enthusiasts. But there's a gap in between the two, where something in between, not quite as stable as SLE, not quite as fast as openSUSE, where we could really do some very interesting things, both technically as developers, but also for our users so they can actually find something that fits exactly what they want in between the two. So actually improving the gap from SUSE's perspective would really help their desire to collaborate more on openSUSE. At the moment, with this gap in between the two, SLE developers don't get much of an opportunity to really work on openSUSE because our code base is moving too fast. And they need a lot more time to do their work on our platform, to backport stuff, forward port stuff, whatever they want to do between the two. That takes an awful lot of work, and the bigger that gap is, the more work that requires. And also that means we don't get their patches as easily into openSUSE. And also, in the other way, it's also a lot harder for them to take the really cool stuff that we've done in openSUSE and then put that into SLE. So that ends up being, like with SLE-12, a huge amount of work to get to the same point where we were already at with 13.1 and 13.2. So this is sort of the long-standing story of, SUSE wanting to work with openSUSE, collaborate on openSUSE, do all the innovation in the openSUSE project, and then be able to use it as part of the main SLE distribution. So as we've heard now on the mailing list and with Marcus's presentation, the big announcement that sort of SUSE wanted to say to here is all of the latest SLE sources for SUSE Enterprise 12 are now in the OBS, available for openSUSE to build with. They're there, and that also includes the maintenance updates. So as SLE-12 gets maintenance updates, they will also appear in OBS, and openSUSE can now actually build a community distribution with enterprise sources as part of it. So not only are we getting collaboration, we're actually getting code now, which is awesome. So when we're talking about sort of closing the gap, the benefits really work in both ways. openSUSE now have a chance to take this stable base and build possibly a very, very interesting regular release on top of it. And if we do that, then we end up with a situation where it'll be an awful lot easier in both directions for collaboration, both from SUSE engineers who are working mainly on SLE to actually contribute stuff back upstream to openSUSE, and for openSUSE stuff to get into this stable code base and actually dramatically improve the pace at which it can change. So what am I really proposing? Back to here again. We've got Tumbleweed, we've got the stable regular release. Let's make it more stable. With openSUSE and the shared SLE sources and SUSE Linux Enterprise, the way we're currently thinking about it, and these are just proposals, nothing set in stone, we would end up with a situation where you'd have Tumbleweed as it is right now, untouched, moving as fast as it always does, moving as fast as it always will, or faster if we can manage it. And the openSUSE release will have a shared core between SLE and openSUSE. So they're about 1,000 packages probably, the base system, kernel, all of the core, or if we wanted the entire sort of SLE base. And on top of that, openSUSE could then build its distribution of basically all the community packages that you don't get in SLE, which at the moment is about 6,000. The interesting idea with this proposal is for us with 13.2, whatever comes next, whatever we call it, if we call it 13.3 or whatever, this would possibly be a bit of a backstep in some sense. You know, the kernel would go back a little bit. GNOME would go back a little bit. But you'd end up with a really stable regular release as an approach. What are you giggling about? No? Possibly, okay. Or, alternatively, we are also thinking of things like this, where the openSUSE regular release could very easily overlay, replace, adapt its own packages to basically overwrite the ones provided by SLE. Therefore, we could have a newer version of GNOME. Hey. The downside of this approach, or the thing to take into account with this approach, is, of course, if the community does that, we don't get the free maintenance of the core packages for the bits we replace. So, if we're putting a new version of GNOME on top of this base, then we're maintaining this version of GNOME just like we do now. But we have to realize that that's going to be something on our backs to actually build. But I think if we go this route, we end up with a chance to build our perfect, stable, regular release. It would be stable. It would be maintained. The plan from SUSE is to have these core packages updated for at least 3 years. Basically keep them updated and available in OBS until the next big version of SLE comes around, which will be based on Tumbleweed. So yeah, 3, 4, maybe 5 years. And we'd have our wide selection of packages. So the question for the audience here, and anybody at home who can comment on this on the mailing list, do we like the idea? If we do like the idea, then how the heck are we actually going to build it? Because none of this is arranged in OBS right now. The packages are there, the sources are there, but how we structure the projects, how we handle things like processes, submissions, actually putting the thing together, this is all to be discussed, all to be decided. When do we do the first release? The current plan from SUSE is to have SLE-12 released by the end of the year. So SLE-12 SP1, sorry. So in theory, we could have openSUSE next, whatever we call it, about the same time. When do we do other releases? Do we tie the openSUSE regular release to the same schedule as SLE, in which case we'd be talking about annual, or between 12 and 18 months? Or do we do something different? The code will be there. We can choose how we use it, how we want to consume it, how we build our regular release. But I think we can build something really, really exciting about this. So, and of course, who's going to help build it? It's a community project. This will always be a community project. So we need volunteers to work on this, to put it together, to figure out these processes, and then, of course, help maintain it in the long run. And on that, I have time for questions now. Anyone? I can't see anything because there's lights in my eyes. Yeah, I can see there's quite a lot of hands there. Okay, of the people who aren't interested in using it, are you not interested because you're using Tumbleweed, or if so, put your hand up. Okay, so who really hates this idea would be the best thing, I guess. No one. Okay, that's a pretty good start. Any other questions or questions to the audience? Yes, Adrian. There's been some talk about that. Yes, so to repeat the question was, have we thought about kind of any workflow for getting community changes back into the core for this, so the shared core between SLE and openSUSE. There's been some thought about it, nothing set in stone. Like I said, we haven't even got a name, so of course nothing set in stone. But I do actually have a slide at the end here, which kind of perfectly fits this, kind of. Ignore the version numbers, because of course they're all likely to change. But the rough idea in terms of sort of flow would be the stuff that openSUSE puts in the openSUSE regular release would be prime candidates for being sort of assumed into the next service pack for the stable base. So whether it's everything or selected stuff, but it would be an awful lot easier to cherry pick and move stuff there. So that's kind of the concept at this point, is sort of community stuff would be the prime candidate for stuff in the next base version. That's a rough idea. That's what I mean with this weird square arrow in the middle. Yes?
My problem with Tumbleweed is VirtualBox and the video drivers.
Yes.
Thanks.
My problem with Tumbleweed is VirtualBox and video drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Will these work in Tumbleweed? Because for now, it's the main reason why I use openSUSE.
Well, so it's a question, so your problem is you've got problems with VirtualBox and the
Yes,
graphics
I
drivers
was said
in
that
Tumbleweed. Yep.
VirtualBox and video drivers won't work in Tumbleweed.
Yep. So, but is the question, will they work in...
Yes, because if the gap is increasing between Tumbleweed and openSUSE release, all the people using virtualization
Yep.
will be obliged to take openSUSE and then to get on the stable version.
Yeah, well, in the case of both of those, I mean, you're using the proprietary video drivers, I'm assuming, and of course, VirtualBox has its proprietary weird add-on modules. Those would work fine with a regular release following this approach, and of course, it's still something we're looking at improving inside Tumbleweed. So, yes, I guess is the easy answer. Question at the back over there. Yeah. No, this is the source. Sorry, repeating the question. The question was, does OBS mean? Well, does this mean that OBS is now building an open SLE? And the answer is no. These are the sources. They're not compiled packages, so they're there available for us to use in other projects. But we're not out of the gate starting by building an open SLE. And to be honest, I think an approach like this is actually way more interesting. You know, SLE is a great enterprise product, but if we did an open SLE, it would just be the same product. With this, we end up being able to produce something that actually has more packages built on there, with, of course, the tweaks that we, the community, think might be better for it. So I think we kind of get the best of both worlds, and we definitely get a chance to build something that's got more to it in terms of packages. Yes, right at the back there.
Is there pressure for a specific time for this to take place, such as the next open release?
There's no pressure in terms of time. I think we have a kind of, sorry, the question was, is there any pressure for time to do a release with this? There's no pressure for time besides the pressure we give ourselves. Obviously, there's always going to be discussions about a roadmap. At the moment, we haven't got a published plan for 13.3. This, of course, potentially disrupts that and means we get to write a completely new plan for the regular release. And yeah, so nothing set in stone. I would say there's potential for sort of a natural end of this year, because that's when SLE-12 SP1 is intended. So we'd have a chance to maybe build the first release of this kind of regular release with that version of the code base. But that's just an idea, a concept, not a deadline. Anybody else got any hands up? I can't see. Yes, Christopher.
So how, in practice, will the arrows going down from Tumbleweed into the stable core work? Because, you know, as Tumbleweed keeps running off into the future, the distance will get bigger and bigger. And so,
so if we want, so the question is sort of how would these lines down from Tumbleweed work, and how would stuff from Tumbleweed end up in the openSUSE release? Then that's going to be work. I mean, it's going to be work that I think actually we're very capable and skilled to do, because it's actually very similar work that we already do in many cases already. Projects like our GNOME and KDE team are quite good at taking their stacks and then effectively backporting it in like a KDE or a GNOME stable add-on project inside OBS. So these are things we know very well, and it would be kind of that same process, but then submitting it to the stable distribution. As that gap gets longer and longer and longer, that work will get harder and harder and harder, definitely. But then maybe this is a conscious decision to, maybe we should make a conscious decision that every version of openSUSE doesn't necessarily have to have every new version of everything. We've got that's Tumbleweed. So maybe we target the stable release for a different use case, which doesn't necessarily need that newest of everything in every version. So this, this version of the slide doesn't show this, but in the original version of this slide, those lines coming down from Tumbleweed kind of got fainter and fainter as time went on, because I think over time we'd probably pull a little bit less, until you kind of get to talking about, okay, what about the next big core version? And then we would just do like we do now and just take everything out of Tumbleweed and suck the whole thing down. So that's kind of how we see it working.
Right.
Question at the back there. You should be able to use that project as a build target and build your package for that, and yes, that should be possible. Any other questions? I can kind of see faces sort of, there we go. Yes?
You said one idea would be to build openSUSE on SLE-1.
Yes.
The other way around, so that basically openSUSE release would be based on the code which we
Yeah, this is something we so the question is could we build an openSUSE on the version of the shared code that will become SLE-12 SP1? That's an idea we've definitely kicked around as a possibility, and that's really a case of timings, what the community think, what we all think, then we'll figure out with SUSE what works there. One of the ideas that we definitely kicked around and no one said was a bad idea when I suggested it, was having the sort of a decent solid beta from SLE-12 SP1, and that's when openSUSE start building on top of that. So it would be earlier, but not way too early where everything's moving there, because you don't really want to have a code base that's flying all over the place. But once it's relatively stable during the sort of SLE-12 service pack development, that might be the right time for openSUSE to start building on it. Yes, I quite like the idea. Don't know if Kula does, though. You're kind of looking at me funny. That's true. Good point. Yes, at the back. Craig.
I'll wait for the mic this time.
Thank you.
On the mailing list, the openSUSE project mailing list, one of the immediate reactions to your announcement was regarding how this might resemble CentOS, and
yep.
you guarded against an immediate response to that you might respond to that more later, perhaps in your announcement today. There are pros and cons to being a CentOS kind of thing. Could you respond to that?
Yeah, I think I kind of answered that question earlier, but I'll try and do it in a different way that kind of makes more sense, I guess. The biggest sort of pro and con of a CentOS is it's just going to be exactly the same as SLE, with no additions, no extra packages, nothing potentially newer and more interesting in there. It'll just be the same. And I think we have an opportunity here to make something way more interesting than that. You know, an openSUSE community distribution with community packages and community ideas in it, but with this nice stable shared code in it. So I'd say the idea works best if we build something better than CentOS, rather than just kind of following that same model, doing that same way, which we won't get, either side won't get nearly as much out of it. at all, really.
I think just in response to that, I think the proposal here is more of a combination building between core OS style, sorry, CentOS style release and Ubuntu LTS.
Yeah, do you want to repeat that over the mic? Because it sounded good. But I don't want to repeat it all, 'cause I couldn't, yeah. I'll grab Sonny. Yeah. There's the mic. Thanks, Sonny, sorry.
I think in response to the question about CentOS similarities, etc., I think the proposal here is more of a bridge between what CentOS are doing, which is effectively taking the enterprise distribution that they base off of, and that's all what they get. And then you've got Canonical with Ubuntu's LTS, which is their enterprise offering, which has slightly newer versions of software, but it's still maintained for 3 years. We, with this, would be able to offer something that kind of bridges both camps. So if you're an LTS user because you need the long-term space, then you've got that, same with CentOS, but you've got the newer releases of the software that you need, whether it be kernel, patches, backport of the patches for kernel and other subsystems, it's all there.
Cool. Any other questions, feedback, ideas, suggestions, flames? No? Well then, I guess I'm done. Thank you very much. And please join the conversation on the project mailing list, talk about it while we're here, get these ideas going, and then we can start building this if everybody thinks it's a good idea. Thank you.